Hello, and welcome to this series of videos in which we will show you how to create apps and portals using the Silver Essence platform. And in this video, we are going to show you the use of the basement. Basement is a set of server-side functions that behave a bit like formulas and functions in Excel. So let me show you that with an example. And we will use the service issue for that in this video. So let's go into the business entities here and let's select the service issue here so we are prepared. And today we are not going to use the business entity quick editor, but we are going to go into the edit properties settings tab. So here are the panels we are going to use today. In the previous video we used the label panel, and today we are going to use some of the other as well. Now, if we are going to create a new service issue, you see there are some fields that are required. Now, let's say we want to have these fields automatically filled with the current date. That's something we can do using Basement. So we have selected the action date properties, and to have a source value we expand the source panel. Now you see some of these fields are a little colored and they have that icon here on the right. This icon opens the Basement helper. Basement is a set of server-side functions and they come in different categories. So let's select the category Essence Tools. Tools will always return a specific values. And if we select that category, then we can select a function. System, date, time. Now, there's nothing more to do here, so you can select it and it will be filled in here. We want to have that when we enter new data, so on add new, and this will apply the system date time from the server, so not the user, the server system date time in that field. Now, we want to use that in different places as well. So let me show you another option here. Again, I select the Essence Tools category. I select the system date time function. So it's filled here, and I'm not going to select it right away, but I'm going to save it. And let's save it as now. If you save it, you need to fill in a domain and an identifier. So pick the domain and identifier as shown here. As you can see, the Basement function is now replaced by a Basement call with now as the extra there. Now let's save this one here, and it is filled in here. Let's go to the next date field created, and there we are going to use Basement call now as well on add new. Let's go into the issue date, and issue date, copy paste Basement call now also on add new. And let me explain more about these checkboxes. Let's select modified here. Modified, we want to have that filled with the current date time now on create, but also if the user edits something, then the current system date time should be renewed. So let's click save to add that to the configuration. Click save and apply the configuration, and let's go back to the business controllers. Refresh the frame here. Now if we click create, you can see issue date and action date are filled in this screen. and I can enter a new service issue here. Let's give it a description. And then we can enter the service issue. Let's add a timestamp there and then click Save to enter this service issue. As you can see, action date is filled, and if we move the slider, you can see the action date, issue date are filled, and created and modified are also filled, even though they were not in the entry screen. So these properties are automatically filled using the basement function we saved as basement call now. So, having done that, let's go to the quick editor and let me show you a little trick here. Created and modified is in a lot of tables. So, let's go into the configurator tools and select this business entity tool here. And here we can say for all properties that are called created, use basement call now on add new, and it's applied to 4 fields in this case. Modified should be also basement call now on add new and on update, and here 3 properties are updated. So this is a quick way to assign the same basement call to a number of properties from different business entities. The tool will find all the properties and will assign the basement call to the source value there. So there we are back with the service issues, and we will go to the business entity service issue here as well. That's where we left off before going into the quick editor. And let me show you some more functions here. We have the action date in the business entity, and the user can change that date. Okay, so if we fill it in here, you can see we can go in here and we can pick any date that we like. So I can even pick a date 3 weeks from now. Let's say we don't want that. We want to have service issues solved within 14 days. So the action date should never be more than 14 days away from the issue date. Now, we are going to do that here in the business entity. So we have selected the property action date, and then we will go into the validator panel. The validator panel shows that it is required. That's a check we can do on the client side. But we are going to enable server validation here. And by checking this box, the basement field for that becomes available. So let's create a server validation function here. From the categories, select the Essence validators. Validators always return true or false. And we are going to select that the day should be with the date difference should be within a certain maximum. Again, here we show a number of example values. It's very rare that you can use these example values, so you will have to change them almost all the time. So you see there is a start date here, and we filled it with an example, but we want to use a property from the service issue. And to get the syntax for that, use the available properties here, select the issue date, and this is what you need. So copy that into here. The next date we will use for our validation will be the action date. So select the action date here. The interval should be in days, so you can use D here. And the maximum value is 14. And here you have the syntax for your validation. Select the validation and it will be copied here, and enter a error message. So if the user picks a date that is 3 weeks away, it will signal this message to the user, and it will prevent the saving or entering data. Click Save to add this validation to the configuration, and then click Save and Apply on the bottom here. So let's see how this works. Let's go back to the business controllers and let's create a new service issue. We select a service issue type and we enter a description, and let's leave out the service object ID here, and we pick a date 3 weeks away. Now, first we can do the client-side validation. The user forgot to enter the service object ID. And next, if that is complete, we will do the server-side validation, and we will signal that the action date should be within 14 days of the issue date. So now we have clever users and they changed the issue date and they can enter it here as well. So let's see how we can make it a bit more difficult for them. So let's go into the business entities again. Let's go here to the issue date and we will expand the input panel here. And here you can do everything that has to do with the input. And you can set the input here to read only. And as you can see, you could also use a basement call here for that. Now let's save and apply these changes. Let's go back to the business controller and we're going to reload the frame here. Okay, click Create again. And now the issue date cannot be manipulated by the user. So there we add the service object ID, we enter a description here, and in this case, if the user wants to pick this date, he has a problem because the date here cannot be changed. So he has to pick a date here that is within the 14-day limit. So there you have it, and we have entered the service issue with a correct action date as we want to be filled here by the user. Now, if we open up that service issue that we have entered before, you will see that it will be visible and there's no problem here. And you can see at every change the modified date is changed also. Now, if I want to change something, then the new rules will apply. So in this case, we will have to change the action date also here. So that's something you have to consider when you change the rules here. And as you can see, again, the modified date is automatically updated in the background. So that's one of the other uses of Basement. Now, let's have a look at something else. Here is the organization ID. You don't have a browser, you don't have a drop-down list, so how should this one be filled? Well, if we select a service object ID, the service object ID also holds the owner organization ID. So let's use Basement to fill the organization ID when the service object changes. So we pick the organization ID here and we go to the input panel. And here we are going to do a neat little trick. We can set a trigger on a certain property. So we can tell the configuration, watch for any changes of the service object ID. And when a change happens, let's do a little function for that. In this case, we are going to go into the tools for open databases. We are working on an SQL database, and we are going to use a function get value from table. And again, we show some example values. Don't use these, but change them to what you need. So if the service object changes, we need to make a trip to the service objects table. We want to query for the service object ID that is pre-filled in the screen. So let's select service issue dot service object ID. This is the syntax we need for the search value. And which column do we want to retrieve? That should be the owner organization ID. So that's the way you can use this function. There is the syntax, and let's select this. Click the Save button to add the trigger, and then click the Save and Apply button here at the bottom to apply these changes. Let's go back to the business controller. Let's reload this frame, and we are going to create a new service issue here. We select a type and we select the object ID and watch. Once we select the service object, then the organization ID is retrieved through that function to the database and filled automatically in here. And then we can continue. We can enter the description here, issue date and action date, and let's save another service issue here. There you have it. That's a new one. So the list of service issues is gradually building up here. So you will see quite a list, and it might get a little lost that the one on the bottom, the action date has already passed. So in this list, we want to make this one stick out. And to do that, we can also use one of the basement functions. So if this date is in the past, we want to have this, let's say, colored red, maybe use bold and maybe a little bit bigger font. So we are going to go to the action date property. And then we not going to use the input panel, but we expand the label panel. Here you can add a style attribute, and that's a CSS, Cascading Style Sheets, standard language here. So you can say the color should be red, and font weight should be bold, and font size should be, let's say, 110%. So that's basically something you can find on the internet, all the syntax for standard CSS. And you can apply that here. So save the changes and then save and apply to the configuration. And if we go back to the business controller and reload the frame, that's what we want to see. The text is now red, it's bold, and it's a little bit bigger. But that only should apply to the bottom one. So let's go back here and add a style validator, and that field is also basement enabled. So we are going to use the Essence Validators category, and we are going to select from the functions that the date is historical. And from the example values, the check date, the date that should be checked, we select that from the properties of the service issue and change this value here. Let's select that one, and there it is. Now save and this to the configuration, and then save and apply the configuration here. Let's go back to the business controllers screen and reload the frame again here. And as you can see, there's only one that has a historical date, at the moment that we shot this movie that is, and that's the one on the bottom. So this will make this action date stick out from the rest. And of course, if you open up the service issue, it's not only applied in the list, it's applied in the screen here as well. So this will make it easier for the user to spot that some cases might need some action. As you can see, basement can also be used to dynamically hide fields from the UI. For example, if the user has insufficient rights, and we can apply a dynamic label with, for example, if the invoice amount is below 0, it should be labeled credit invoice instead of invoice. You can apply basement to the input to set it to read only. Again, if a user has insufficient rights to change something, you can use basement. You can use this for the recalculation functions, like we did with the organization ID. We can dynamically hide search fields here, and we can use a default value which should be applied dynamically. For example, you want to apply the current date or the end date of the week. Those kinds of functions you can get from basement. You can also dynamically determine if a property should be a list column or not. For example, if the user has no rights to cost prices of items, then you can suppress that field in the viewer and the lists. Here you have the validator, so you can automatically have it set to required under certain conditions. And you can use basement here for the validators to use it as a server validation like we did here with the action date. So that's also another validation you can do here. You can use it as a source value like we did with the default value to put into the issue date, action date, and also those are all properties that you can enable with basement. We can also use it, for example, in lists to enable or disable the Excel export function. And we have already used it with the methods video, where we used the system date time for the processed date. So that's all for now about basement server-side functions for your configuration.